Derrick Lawson sat atop his black Ducati, the engine purring beneath him, its rhythmic growl the only sound against the backdrop of Kingswell Properties' towering headquarters. The skyscraper stretched into the morning sky, a testament to power, prestige, and influence. The glass facade gleamed in the sunlight, its reflection pristine, untainted. But Derrick knew better. Inside that fortress of wealth, lies, corruption, and unchecked arrogance festered beneath the polished veneer. He had spent the past year watching reports pile up, complaints of workplace discrimination, unethical promotions, and a culture that rewarded cruelty over competence. And yet, none of those reports had made it to the boardroom. They had been buried. Derrick clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the handlebars. This was supposed to be his inheritance, a company his father had built from the ground up, an empire that should have been the pinnacle of innovation and fairness. But instead, it had become a playground for the ruthless, a machine that devoured the powerless, not anymore. Derrick took a slow breath, then reached into his leather jacket and pulled out the neatly folded uniform. Navy blue, slightly worn, the embroidered Kingswell maintenance logo resting over the chest pocket. A disguise, an entrance into a world where power wouldn't protect him, where no one would bow, where they would show their true faces. With each button he fastened, he stripped away Derrick Lawson, billionaire's son, and in his place stood Derrick, the janitor. The moment Derrick stepped into the lobby, he became invisible. No greetings, no polite nods. Executives strode past him, their conversations filled with power plays and stock valuations. Assistants barely spared him a glance, too busy balancing trays of espresso and stacks of documents for their bosses. To them, he was just another nameless worker, another cog in the machine. The irony wasn't lost on him. If they knew his name, they'd fall over themselves to offer him coffee, shake his hand, whisper flattery in his ear. But they didn't know. And that's exactly why he was here. To see them for who they really were. Derrick had barely taken 3 steps forward when a sharp voice sliced through the air. "Hey! Deliveries go through the back." He turned, meeting the cold gaze of Bradley Kirk, Senior Operations Manager. A man with an immaculate suit, a predatory smirk, and the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. Derrick had read the reports. Bradley was ruthless, calculated, and a master at manipulating corporate politics. He had spent years carefully crafting an image of power and influence, keeping the higher-ups pleased while systematically crushing anyone beneath him. What Bradley hadn't realized yet was that today, he was walking straight into his own downfall. "I'm not a delivery guy," Derrick said evenly. "I work here, new hire." Bradley's smirk deepened, his eyes flickering to the uniform. Recognition of status, or rather, the lack of it. "Janitorial?" Derrick nodded. Bradley chuckled under his breath. "Well, don't stand around. Go grab a mop." Derrick held his gaze for a moment longer, cataloging every ounce of arrogance in that smirk. Then, he turned and walked away. The first name on his list. Derrick barely had time to get to the janitor's closet before another presence loomed over him. Melinda Carter, his new supervisor. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she approached, her presence commanding attention through sheer intimidation. "Listen, new guy," she said, her arms crossed, her eyes twisting with condescension. "I don't have time to babysit, so let's make this simple." A rag landed in Derrick's hands. "You work fast, silent, and invisible, got it?" Derrick's fingers curled around the rag, his grip tightening. Melinda Carter had been one of the most frequent names in the complaints he had reviewed. A woman who thrived on fear, who ruled through psychological warfare rather than leadership. Employees either bent to her will or they broke under it. Derrick gave a slow nod. Understood. Melinda's eyes flickered with amusement, as if she had already sized him up, decided he was weak. She scoffed and walked away, heels clicking with finality. Second name on the list. Derrick spent the next few hours watching, listening, absorbing the hidden truths of Kingswell, and what he saw made his stomach twist. Executives ignoring employees who weren't on their level. Managers treating assistants like disposable objects. But worst of all, the silence. He saw it in the way people avoided looking at Melinda when she lashed out at a junior employee. He saw it in the way others forced nervous laughter when Bradley mocked a worker in front of his peers. Fear ruled here, and fear was a prison. Derrick clenched his jaw, gripping the mop tighter. This was his father's company. But not for much longer. It happened in the executive lounge. Derrick was cleaning near the coffee station when Melinda strolled in. She stopped when she saw him, a slow, deliberate smile curling at the edges of her lips. "You missed a spot," she said. Derrick barely had time to react before she picked up a full cup of steaming coffee and with a flick of her wrist, spilled it across the pristine marble table. Splash. Dark liquid dripped onto the floor. Silence settled over the room as employees pretended not to watch, but Derrick knew they were. Melinda folded her arms, her expression smug. "Clean it. Again." Derrick inhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around the mop handle. Not yet. The storm had not yet reached its peak, but it would, and when it did, they would never forget it. Derrick had always believed that power didn't corrupt people. It revealed them, and in just a few days, Kingswell's true nature had unfolded before him, layer by rotten layer. He had stepped into this company as a ghost, a nameless worker, a man without influence. And in that invisibility, he saw the worst of them. The truth wasn't just disappointing, it was disgusting. The longer Derrick stayed undercover, the more he understood the invisible chains that bound the people of Kingswell. Bradley Kirk thrived on manipulation. He didn't just command obedience, he crafted a world where employees feared the consequences of dissent. Promotions weren't earned, they were bartered for loyalty. Respect wasn't given, it was demanded through intimidation. Derrick had seen how Bradley spoke to employees, calm, calculated, and laced with threats. "Do you want to keep your job? Then do it my way." Kingswell doesn't tolerate weakness. If you can't handle the pressure, maybe this isn't the place for you. And worse, the victims of his tactics believed him. They had been conditioned to accept that this was just how the corporate world worked. If Bradley controlled people through fear, Melinda Carter controlled them through exhaustion. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her weapon was overwork, unrealistic expectations, and quiet, systematic elimination of those who couldn't keep up. Derrick had watched how she operated. Employees were given impossible deadlines, then blamed when they failed. Those who dared to question her found their responsibilities doubled overnight. Quiet meetings were held, where names were removed from promotion lists without a second thought. And when Derrick had overheard a conversation between her and a junior employee, his blood boiled. "If you want to last here, you need to toughen up," she had said, her tone casual. "Kingswell doesn't hold hands. We reward survivors." The employee had nodded, but Derrick saw the exhaustion in their eyes. How many dreams had been crushed under her heel? But perhaps what unsettled Derrick the most wasn't Bradley or Melinda. It was the people who saw, who heard, who knew the truth, and did nothing. He watched as employees averted their eyes when Melinda destroyed someone's confidence in a meeting. People forced nervous laughter when Bradley humiliated a colleague. Whispers filled the break room about who would be the next to fall out of favor. Fear wasn't just a weapon here. It was a disease that turned good people into silent accomplices. And Derrick hated it. On the fourth night of his undercover shift, Derrick witnessed something that made his decision clear. He had been wiping down a boardroom table when he heard a voice. Sharp, condescending, familiar. Bradley Kirk. Derrick turned and saw him standing over an employee, a woman in her early 40s, her hands wringing a file folder. He recognized her. Linda Walker. One of the most experienced employees at Kingswell. A woman who, by all accounts, should have been leading a department by now. But she wasn't. Because of people like Bradley. "Linda, I don't know why you're making this difficult," Bradley sighed. "It's a simple request." "Sir, Linda hesitated. "I just don't think these numbers reflect—" Bradley leaned in, his smile thin. "Did I ask what you thought? Or did I ask you to do your job?" The room fell silent. Linda's face tightened, but she nodded. And Derrick saw it, the moment the fight drained from her shoulders. He knew this wasn't the first time she had been spoken to like this, and it wouldn't be the last. Not unless something changed. Derrick set his rag down. It was time. As Derrick lay in his small, windowless janitor's closet that night, he stared at the ceiling. The corruption wasn't just in the leadership. It was in the system. A system that rewarded obedience over talent, compliance over courage. A system that Kingswell had become comfortable with. And he was about to tear it down. Because tomorrow, Derrick Lawson would no longer be invisible. Tomorrow, the storm would break. And Kingswell Properties would never be the same again. The morning sun barely pierced through the towering glass of Kingswell Properties as Derrick Lawson stood outside, taking in the moment. Today was the day. For days he had watched, listened, and collected every ounce of proof he needed to take down the corruption festering within his father's company. He had seen good people crushed beneath the weight of a broken system. He had seen enough. Now the mask was coming off. The storm was here. Inside Kingswell's main lobby, employees bustled about, their usual morning routines carrying an air of urgency. Because today, something was different. Robert Lawson was coming. Derrick had made sure of that. His father's schedule had been cleared, and a sudden board meeting had been arranged. A meeting where everything would be revealed. As he made his way through the corridors in his janitor's uniform for the last time, Derrick could feel the tension thick in the air. People whispered. Executives checked their phones more than usual. The front desk receptionist stole nervous glances toward the entrance, waiting for the CEO's arrival. Derrick smirked. They had no idea what was about to hit them. Bradley Kirk, unaware of his impending fate, adjusted his tie as he made his way toward the executive wing. He loved days like this. A surprise visit from Robert Lawson meant a chance to rub shoulders with power. It was an opportunity to show off, to solidify his status. Spotting Derrick near the elevators, still in his janitor's uniform, Bradley sneered. "Still here?" he scoffed. "Guess even you weren't dumb enough to get yourself fired yet." Derrick didn't react. He just smiled. Bradley frowned. There was something different about him today. Before he could say anything else, the main doors opened. The real CEO had arrived. Robert Lawson strode into the building, his presence immediately commanding the room. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in an immaculate charcoal gray suit, he was the embodiment of power and control. His sharp blue eyes scanned the lobby, taking in the sea of faces before him. Bradley was the first to approach, his smile calculated and precise. "Mr. Lawson, it's an honor." Robert barely acknowledged him. Instead, his gaze settled on Derrick. A hush fell over the room. For a moment, nothing moved. The air was thick with confusion, with realization slowly creeping into the minds of those watching. Then, in a voice clear and unmistakable, Robert spoke. "Derrick." A wave of shock and horror rippled through the office. The janitor. The nobody they had ignored, belittled, humiliated, was being addressed by the CEO himself. Bradley's smug expression evaporated. Melinda Carter, standing in the distance, went rigid, her fingers gripping the tablet in her hands. People began whispering. "Derrick. Derrick Lawson?" The name clicked in their minds like a gun being cocked. The heir to the company, the man who had been watching them all along. Derrick stepped forward, standing at full height now, no longer hiding behind the disguise of a janitor. He looked around, scanning the faces of those who had ignored him, insulted him, underestimated him. Then, he turned to Bradley and let the truth sink in. "I've spent the past week working here," Derrick said, his voice calm but heavy with authority. Bradley swallowed hard, his confidence crumbling. "I've seen everything," Derrick continued. "I've watched how you treat people beneath you. I've watched how promotions are handed to the privileged while the deserving are pushed aside. I've seen how power is abused here." A ripple of unease spread through the room. "I've seen it all," Derrick said, "and I won't allow it to continue." The finality in his voice left no room for argument. Bradley found his voice, barely. "Mr. Lawson, Derrick raised a hand, and Bradley fell silent. "The way I was treated this past week is proof of how deeply broken this company has become," Derrick said. "But this isn't just about me. It's about every employee you've bullied, every person you've stepped on to get ahead." Bradley visibly shrank. Derrick turned to Melinda next. She lifted her chin slightly, still trying to maintain some form of control. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Derrick asked. Melinda hesitated. For the first time in her career, she had no words. The silence stretched, heavy and damning. Then, Derrick looked at his father. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk." Robert Lawson's expression remained unreadable, but he gave a single nod, and with that, Derrick turned toward the elevators, knowing that the real battle was about to begin. Because this wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about burning the old system to the ground. As Derrick and his father disappeared into the executive wing, the remaining employees stood frozen in shock. Executives who had prided themselves on their status now looked at each other with unease. If Derrick had seen how they treated him, what else had he seen? A junior employee, one of the assistants Derrick had spoken to earlier in the week, whispered, "He was here the whole time." Linda Walker, standing near the break room, slowly smiled. Bradley Kirk stood in place, his breathing uneven, his mind racing. There had to be a way out of this. Melinda Carter, though outwardly calm, gripped her tablet so hard that her knuckles turned white. She wouldn't go down without a fight. For the first time in Kingswell's history, the ones who had power felt afraid. Derrick Lawson stepped into the executive conference room, his father just a step behind him. The walls of power that had shielded corruption were about to crumble. The air in the room was suffocating. The usual arrogance from Kingswell's top executives had vanished, replaced with a stifling, almost paralyzing unease. They all knew. They had mistreated the wrong man. Robert took his usual seat at the head of the long mahogany conference table. Derrick, instead of taking his usual spot beside him, remained standing. His father's expression was unreadable. He had built this company from nothing. He had turned Kingswell into an empire, and yet he had failed to see the rot within. Derrick didn't speak first. He let the silence hang in the air, stretching the tension to its breaking point. Then, without looking up, Robert finally spoke. "Tell me what you found." Derrick's gaze swept across the table. Some executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others kept their eyes glued to the polished wood. He placed a thick black folder onto the table and slid it toward his father. It was filled with everything. Reports of workplace harassment buried under bureaucratic red tape. Emails detailing how employees were passed over for promotions in favor of those who fit the company's image. Financial records showing questionable bonuses for executives who covered up complaints. Robert flipped through the pages, his face a mask of cold calculation. But Derrick knew his father well enough to recognize the signs. The tight grip on the paper, the sharp inhale when he read a particular line. Derrick stepped forward. It was time to make things clear. Bradley Kirk was the first to break the silence. He had to try and salvage himself. "Mr. Lawson," he began, his voice just barely steady. I can explain. There were misunderstandings, and if I had known..." Derrick cut him off with a sharp look. "No more lies." "Tell me, Bradley," Derrick said, his voice calm but firm. "Would you have treated me differently if you had known who I was?" Bradley hesitated. He knew the truth, but he couldn't afford to say it. Derrick leaned forward. "You saw a man in a janitor's uniform and decided he wasn't worth your respect. That tells me everything I need to know about you." The room was dead silent. Derrick took out a red envelope from his pocket and placed it in front of Bradley. Bradley stared at it, his breath catching. He knew what it meant. Termination, effective immediately. "No, wait," Bradley began, but Derrick had already turned his back on him. Two security guards stepped forward. "Please leave the building." Bradley's face turned ashen, his mouth opened, but no words came. Everything he had built, all the power he had amassed, it was over. As he was escorted out, the silence was deafening. No one spoke up for him, because no one wanted to be next. Melinda Carter sat stiffly in her chair, watching as Bradley disappeared down the hallway. But she didn't panic. She was different. She knew how to survive. Melinda folded her hands neatly on the table. "Derrick," she said, her voice composed, "I understand that you're upset. But a company of this size requires discipline. Not everyone is fit to be in leadership positions." Derrick tilted his head slightly. "And who decides that, Melinda?" "You." She didn't blink. "I make tough decisions. That's my job." Derrick nodded, then pulled out another red envelope. Melinda's fingers tightened on the armrests of her chair, but still she kept her composure. "Pack your things," Derrick said simply. "You're done." Melinda's lips pressed into a thin line. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't grovel. She simply stood up, smoothing her blazer. "Kingswell won't survive without people like me," she said smoothly. Derrick gave a small smile. "Watch me." She held his gaze for a few seconds longer, then turned and strode out of the room, her heels clicking against the marble floors. As soon as she was gone, the remaining executives let out a collective breath. But Derrick wasn't finished. One by one, Derrick listed every name of every executive who had turned a blind eye to injustice. More red envelopes followed. Some tried to argue, others sat in stunned silence. By the end of the meeting, half the executive board was gone. But Derrick wasn't here to destroy Kingswell. He was here to rebuild it. He turned to those who remained, the ones who had stood by silently, but hadn't actively contributed to the toxicity. "You have a choice," Derrick said. "If you're willing to change, if you're willing to help build a company that values people as much as profits, then stay. But if you can't, leave now." Silence. Then, one by one, the remaining leaders nodded. Kingswell's future had just changed forever. As Derrick left the conference room, he found Linda Walker waiting outside. She looked at him, a mixture of hope and uncertainty in her eyes. "Is it over?" she asked. Derrick exhaled, then smiled. "No," he said. "It's just beginning." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something different, a gold envelope. Linda's eyes widened as she took it. A promotion. She had spent years being overlooked, despite her dedication. But not anymore. "Welcome to the new Kingswell," Derrick said. "I need people like you." Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the envelope. Then, for the first time in a long time, she smiled. And as Derrick looked around the company his father had built, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just his legacy. It was his chance to make things right. The echoes of the corporate shakeup still lingered in the air. The tension that once suffocated Kingswell Properties had begun to dissipate, leaving behind something different, the possibility of real change. Derrick Lawson stood in his father's office, gazing out at the city skyline. He had grown up watching his father build Kingswell from the ground up, had witnessed firsthand what real leadership looked like. But somewhere along the way, the soul of the company had been lost. Now it was up to him to restore it. He turned as Robert Lawson entered the room, closing the door behind him. For the first time in years, they were truly alone. Robert studied his son for a long moment, then walked toward his desk, placing a hand on the dark oak surface. The man who had built an empire was facing the man who would redefine it. "You didn't hesitate," Robert finally said. "You cleaned house without blinking." Derrick met his father's gaze, his voice steady. "I did what needed to be done." Robert exhaled slowly, nodding. "And now?" "Now," Derrick said, "we rebuild." His father chuckled, a low, weary sound. Kingswell was always meant to be a legacy, a place where hard work was rewarded, where people grew alongside the company. That's what I intended when I started it. He shook his head. "But I lost sight of it." Derrick didn't soften his stance. "You trusted the wrong people." Robert met his son's gaze and, for the first time, he didn't try to defend himself. "You're right." Silence stretched between them before Robert nodded toward the CEO's chair. A symbolic gesture. "You want it?" Robert asked. Derrick didn't hesitate. "Yes." Robert let out a slow breath, then nodded. "Then don't just run the company, Derrick. Lead it. Make it better than I ever could." Derrick extended his hand. His father shook it. The torch had been passed. Derrick wasted no time in laying the foundation for Kingswell's rebirth. The first major change? A company-wide restructuring. Salary transparency was implemented, eliminating the quiet wage gaps that had existed for years. Promotion processes were redesigned, ensuring that performance, not favoritism, determined career advancement. A confidential reporting system was established, allowing employees to speak up about workplace injustices without fear of retaliation. But Derrick knew that real change had to start at the top, which was why his first executive hire wasn't from the outside. It was Linda Walker. When Derrick called Linda into his office, she arrived cautiously, unsure of what to expect. She had spent years at Kingswell being overlooked, dismissed, and silenced. That era was over. "Linda," Derrick said, placing an envelope on the desk in front of her. "Effective immediately. You're being promoted to Senior Vice President of Employee Relations." Linda blinked. I don't know what to say." Derrick smiled. "Then don't say anything. Just do what you've always done. Fight for what's right." Her hands trembled slightly as she took the envelope. For the first time in her career, she wasn't being pushed aside. She was being recognized. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "I won't let you down. I know you won't." And just like that, the first brick in Kingswell's new foundation was laid. While Kingswell turned toward a brighter future, its former tyrants faced a much different fate. Bradley Kirk had been confident he could land another high-ranking position elsewhere, until word spread of what had happened at Kingswell. Every major firm in the industry now saw him as a liability. Instead of corner offices, he found himself receiving polite rejections and cold shoulders. His reputation was in ruins. Melinda Carter, ever the survivor, attempted to distance herself from Kingswell's downfall, but her name was tied to too many scandals, her methods too infamous. No company wanted the risk. For the first time, they were experiencing what they had inflicted on others. Justice had been served. Months passed, and slowly the culture of fear faded. Derrick walked the halls of his company, not as an untouchable CEO, but as a leader who listened. Employees greeted him without hesitation, without fear. Performance soared. Retention rates improved. People believed in Kingswell again. As Derrick stood in his office one evening, watching the sun dip below the skyline, he realized something. This wasn't just about Kingswell. This was about proving that companies, no matter how broken, could be rebuilt with integrity. That leadership wasn't about power. It was about responsibility. Derrick's journey wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about transformation. This story is a reminder that true leadership is not measured by status, but by the impact one has on others. Lessons to remember. Power should never come at the expense of dignity. Good leaders uplift others. Bad leaders fall alone. A strong company isn't built on fear. It's built on respect. The past doesn't define the future. Change is always possible. Now it's your turn. Have you ever witnessed injustice in the workplace? What do you think makes a true leader? If you were Derrick, would you have handled things differently? Drop your comments below. Let's discuss. Share this story with others who need to hear it. Let's start a conversation about real leadership. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, inspiring stories. The best stories are the ones that make a difference. Let's build a future worth leading.